Hi, my name is Peter Boghassian. I'm from Australia.
Nigel?
Hello, I'm Nigel Dobson-Keith. I'm from Southern America.
Now, I've been trying to get this right. Boghossian or
It's
Sim?
like explosion with a B. Boghossian explosion.
Boghossian explosion. I'm just going to disrobe.
Please.
Not all the way.
Please.
It's an Australian custom, Peter.
It's the Naked Podcast Show.
Wave on waves, it's the gun of bedroom. Adelaide, lady, who landed here and made it their home. Adelaide, who 10-pound bombs to the refugees. Adelaide, lady, who brings Italians to the knees. Adelaide, who oh, little lady, oh, Adelaide, who oh, little lady, who.
Hello and welcome to the Adelaide Show, the podcast that puts South Australia on centre stage. I'm Steve Davis, and joining me here in the Aqaba Hotel tonight, I have Nigel Dobson-Keith.
Good evening, everyone.
And Peter Boghassian.
My pleasure to be here.
My pronunciation still working, Peter?
Absolutely perfect.
Now, Peter's here in town. I describe Peter as a secular activist, a philosophy professor, and also an author. Am I about right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
And soon to be a wine aficionado for Australian wines.
I'm loving it.
Also tonight, in honour of your visit, the music we've chosen is from a local outfit called Satan's Cheerleaders.
That's perfect. That's ideal.
So we've got one of their tracks coming up. Also, in Time to Think, George Inglis will honour your visit by meditating on our label as the City of Churches. In Is It News, Nigel's dived back through the old publications and found stories of faith he'll put us to the test. Max Martin will ask why evolution is killing us. Our brain's innate drive for technological development is making us fat and unfit. All that and a whole lot more coming up on this episode of The Adelaide Show.
Adelaide, 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 you Adelaide, 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 who.
First order of business, as always, is to taste the South Australian drink of the week. Before we do that, though, Peter, Nigel, would you mind raising your glasses as we have to toast our late patron, Queen Adelaide? To the Queen.
To the Queen and all who may sail in her.
Now, the wine we're drinking tonight, would someone be so kind as to pass the bottle to me? Okay, we are drinking a Tim Adams. Now, Peter, you're new to this town. In this world, you mention Tim Adams to any South Australian, and they go a bit weak in the knees.
Really?
Very well-established wine label from the Clare Valley, which is north of our city, about an hour and a half's drive north, and you're into some beautiful wine country. And from the Clare Valley tonight, we're having a Cabernet Malbec. Actually, Americans are pretty good at doing French accent. How would you say?
I'm not good at doing a French accent. But I will say, I don't usually go for cabs, as I said, but it's very smooth. I like it. It's full-bodied.
It's modified a bit by the Malbec, which is going to soften it.
It's just a full taste. I really like it. And if I didn't like it, I would tell you that I don't like it.
Yeah. Nigel, what are you getting?
Yeah, it's very good. It's smoothed out nicely. The Malbec helps. The years have gone by have helped as well.
What I'm finding is, as we'd expect with an older wine, and this is 7 years old now, the fruit is not prominent. There's no prominent fruit there on my palate. Very smooth, though. There is a tannic finish just to dry the palate right at the end.
What does it have hints of when you taste it?
I actually got a hint of a blueberry that had you turned your head because you thought you saw movement, and it ducks behind the alleyway. That's the amount of fruit that I got on my palate.
That's exactly right. We agreed.
So this is a beautiful drop, which happens to be in the Inomatic system here at the Aqaba Hotel. So if you're coming to the Aqaba Hotel in due course over the next month or two, you can order it by a taste, by a glass or by a number of glasses, and from the enigmatic system, no matter which order in the bottle your little slurp comes from, it's always pristine, just as Tim Adams expected. And if you'd like to try this, we can have a bottle of this up for grabs this week. So if you'd like to win a bottle of the Tim Adams Clare Valley 2008 Cabernet Malbec, provided you're an Australian citizen, I'm just glancing at Peter. All you have to do between now and midnight next Monday night is on our Facebook page, Twitter account at The Adelaide Show, or email us, podcast@theadelaideshow.com.au. Just send a message saying Tim Adams.
By the way, are we going to do like a thumb up? Do we do that? Are we all going to give this a thumb up?
Well, I'm giving it a thumb up and a thumb in.
As well.
So that's 2, 3.
Yeah.
This is worth trying. This is Tim Adams Clare Valley 2008 Cabernet Malbec, the South Australian drink of the week.
The Made to Move Minute, featuring Max Martin and or Dr. Nathan Harton from Inform Health and Fitness Solutions in Norwood.
Hi, this is Max Martin from Inform Health and Fitness Solutions with this week's Made to Move Minute. So this week's Adelaide Show podcast is about all things critical thinking. It's about discussions about faith, evidence for and against, and so on. So I wanted to stay on topic with you and actually propose to you that evolution is actually killing us. So what do I mean by this? Now, there is no question that all the evolving technological advancements that we get to benefit from are making life easier for us. No question. But is this a good thing? Could it be that all this comfort that these advancements are giving to us are contributing to our health issues? So we're actually caught up in a little conundrum. We've got this interesting inner struggle going on. You see, our brains are actually designed to make us more efficient. They are constantly looking for ways to protect us, to make us more comfortable, to make us safer, to actually help us preserve our energy for times of struggle and famine and war and all that sort of stuff. So, on one hand, our brains are trying to make us very, very efficient. But then we've got this cognitive awareness that this efficiency is actually bad for us, right? If we are metabolically efficient, if we're not burning enough energy, we're actually becoming fatter. If we're very comfortable, then we're becoming unfitter. And we know that these are things that are affecting our health negatively. So we've got one part driving us in one direction and our awareness driving us in a different direction. And so we can see why it's so easy to actually opt for the more sedentary and comfortable options, because that's what our brains are constantly driving us towards. So what do we do about this? Well, my advice to you is really an extension of what we discussed last week. We basically have to get a little bit more uncomfortable. We almost need to try and reverse time somewhat in all these technological advancements. So what can we do? And again, the advice is not going to be anything brand new, but now you have another reason to follow it. Your brain wants to make you efficient, and you have to cognitively make a decision to be a little bit less efficient. So walk to the shops. It'll take longer, yes, but you will actually burn more calories and get fitter while you do it. Can you do some of your washing by hand? Can you get out of the car when you get home and lift the garage door manually rather than just press a button and let it do it for you? You know, how about trying to chop down a tree, or at least do pruning now that it's winter and it's going to be pruning time? Do it yourself instead of paying someone else to do it. So look at all those little comfort things that you have around you that make life easier for you, and see if you can find a more manual, more active way to do them. I hope this gives you a little bit more clarity. Your brain wants to make you comfortable. Your role is to challenge it a little bit more. I hope you have a great week. I'll chat to you again next week.
A critical thinking framework is something we try to work within this program. It's coupled with a natural curiosity about the people of Adelaide and South Australia, the history we have here, and the changes that are underway in our community. It's also fair to say that critical thinking is at the very core, the very existence of tonight's guest, Professor Peter Boghassian, an American philosopher who's taken critical thinking beyond the classroom and polite society and even down into the cells of prisons in the US as well, to expose inmates to new ways of thinking. He's our captive guest tonight. Welcome, Peter.
It's fantastic to be here as we go through these bottles of red wine.
That's helping get things going here. I suppose I should mention the other reason you're here this week is your secular activism, especially through your latest book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, in which you argue faith is a cognitive sickness.
That's correct.
That's been turned into a moral virtue.
That's correct.
Can one actually pursue critical thinking without actually ditching one's faith or religious beliefs?
Sure, people do it all the time. People do it all the time because they compartmentalize. If you really want to be a holistic critical thinker, then you have to apply the tools and the attitudinal disposition to critical thinking to every conceivable aspect of your life and all of your beliefs. And that's when the discrepancy happens. It's when people segment off certain aspects of their cognitive lives or even their emotional lives, and they don't apply those tools or they don't have those attitudinal dispositions.
The other thing, before we move too far away from that quote that I want to pick up on, is likening faith to a cognitive sickness. Now, here's my question with this. I do this podcast, some would argue, because I have delusions of grandeur, which would be a cognitive sickness. And yet it propels me to keep doing this. And I know great artists in the world use their cognitive sickness to draw out, propel, give them false confidence to push through. Is there something that's not necessarily pejorative about the term cognitive sickness?
That's not pejorative. I would hope it's incredibly pejorative. But here's the difference between that and your podcast. You're sitting in front of a microphone that's real. Before we had a battery fiasco, that's real. There's electricity that you can pull from the wall. All of the objects of which we're speaking have reality. As Dan Barker says, theology is a subject without an object, whereas you're here talking about real things and real goals. Now, if your goal as a result of doing this podcast was to be a professional football player, that would be misaligned.
There goes your career, Steve.
I was hoping the Adelaide Crows would pick me up next season. The other thing, to round off this sentence, in talking about faith itself, I've been... It's funny, you buy a car of a certain make and you see lots of those cars on the road. I know that you're coming on to talk about faith, and my ears pricked up with so many conversations and snippets that I've been reading. And one of the conversations I heard talking about faith was that there are many people compelled or motivated to do great work in helping for the poor, the sick, the outcast, etc., because of their faith. If that was taken away, would we be poorer as a result? If that was
taken away and somebody doesn't want to help people, they're psychopaths, right? They have some kind of a cognitive problem, a deeper, maybe even a moral problem, a deeper than an epistemological problem. But that is how they come to knowledge, epistemology, how we know, which is the title of my tour. So I think if somebody is only doing good things because they fear going to hell, then that person almost invariably has some very deep-seated psychological issues.
So the end doesn't justify the means. That the fact that they're trying to do this for whatever reason but doing good along the way, we'd still question the value of that.
No, I mean, short of head trauma or some kind of bizarre thing, there's no reason that an adult should have to maintain a delusion to be a good person or a kind person or a just person.
Yeah, I think altruism came way before religion because we're a social species. So by default, humans would normally help each other without needing sort of a justification as to why I'm doing this because of whatever. It's a benefit of being a social creature.
So in getting some of the context around this particular discussion about faith and I suppose religion to some degree, I'd like to draw a distinction there because I've been reading through your book, The Manual for Creating Atheists. And
you like it?
I've really enjoyed it. And look, I need to tell you why I was intrigued to read it.
Okay.
I was brought up in the church and moved away about, 8 years ago or thereabouts. And along that way, I heard a number of podcasts that are quite entertaining from the US, which are really picking up on some of the absolutely loopy and in some cases absolutely dangerous excesses of religion on the far right. That is just so dehumanizing. And yet I look around here and I've got great friends who are fully entrenched Christians, and I see a disconnect. I don't see it black and white like a good guys and a bad guys. And I found what I enjoyed about your book is trying to get inside the headspace of curbing a motivation to try and deconvert people, whilst at the same time working out how can you actually come to a conversation and say, you know what, I actually don't subscribe to that belief system anymore, and hope that that's not controversial, because in fact in our society it's actually quite controversial not to be subscribing to a religion.
So if I may ask you a question, how did you escape?
Well, for me, I was living in Hungary for a long time. A lot of my friends, very well read, multilingual, they love their philosophy, which was bringing up a topic we'll get back to later tonight, and gradually got me questioning more. And at one point, I remember I went to Barcelona to see Leonard Cohen, my favourite singer, and I caught the train to the airport on the way home. This is back in the early 1990s, no mobile phones, no nothing. And I got the sense that we were going the wrong direction in the train. It was about to become an express train into the hills of Spain, and I'd be lost. So after making a decision to hop off the train, I hopped off, and there I was on a lonely railway station way out of the outskirts of Barcelona. And I thought, how am I going to get to the airport now? The plane's leaving shortly. And I had made the decision that weekend that I would no longer be a person who is of faith. And I said, wow, I've got to work this out for myself. And I looked around and I saw a taxi cab rank out the front of the station. I thought, I'll just do that. It'll burn more money, but I'll get there. And at that moment, the thought hit me, had I still been a person of faith, I would have said, thank you, God, for putting that taxi rank there and that cab. I would have given the benefit of the doubt. So that is a long-winded answer to your question, but that was the crystallizing moment that says, wow, it was actually that growing sense that I was just giving a benefit of doubt to happenstance throughout life.
So imagine in aggregate how much better we'd be off as a society, how much better our communities would be off if we all stood on our own 2 feet and made decisions for ourselves without prayer, without reference to an imagined entity, without thinking about talking snakes or what have you. Imagine the collective impact of saying, look, this is it. We have one life. We have one world. We have anthropogenic global warming. We have very serious problems. And the way to solve those problems isn't to pray about them. It's to act upon them. Now, admittedly, you gave us two of your crazies, Ken Ham and Ray Comfort, but we have...
Please keep them.
Thanks. Appreciate that. But we have the governor of Rick Perry, who's, for example, running for president, who prays for rain. He has a rain summit, and so we have a different type of way that the faith virus has institutionalized itself among the political elite in our country. And so fortunately, you're not as subject to that in your country. But yeah, there are plenty of people who are decent, good people of faith, and there are ways to have communicative interactions or conversations with those people to help them become more reflective and to value what's true. And that can be done in a very civilized way. Nobody's upset. Nobody's angry. So there are ways to make those conversations more productive so that, again, getting back to your example, people can stand on their own 2 feet. You know, maybe I've had a few drinks, but I'm thinking about something you said about, it's a really interesting expression to me, the benefit of the doubt. That's an interesting expression. What do you mean by it? What do you think in common parlance people mean by that?
What I meant was, if I wasn't able to explain something, God was the answer. That was the ultimate answer, the X in any equation to fill in any blanks. And I just got to a point where I got intellectually tired of that, because it would seem that that's fine for when it was a good outcome. But when it was a bad outcome and you go,
Right.
God, then that becomes a rather sinister and disturbing scenario where, of course, the ultimate apologetic is to say, well, that's the mystery of God that plays with you like Job and dangles horrors your way.
That's an excuse, by the way, for people not to formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence. They say, oh, God works in mysterious ways. And so sometimes they use placeholders for evidence, like trust or hope or what have you. But it really does come down to that value. We haven't spoken about that yet. We did a little bit off air, but that value of not formulating their beliefs on the basis of evidence and what role evidence ought to play in belief formation. Because I don't think it's possible for people to be theists or to be Christians or Muslims, or you can leave the Abrahamic traditions. I don't think that's possible if people value the role of evidence in belief formation. I don't think it's possible to believe people can walk on water and snakes can talk and such.
But often what I found in my time, and in fact at one point I did enroll to become a priest.
Really?
A long time ago. In that scenario when you say it's too literal, an understanding of the story, it was more allegorical or it was an analogy, etc.
Okay, I have no problem with that, but the root is that a man rose from a tomb, who was dead rose from a tomb. Now, that I would argue is a core Christian belief. It's possible there are some people who are liberation theologians or extremely liberal Christians who hold the belief that they don't think that there was necessarily an historical Jesus, but they consider themselves Christians. Okay, those people, come on, let's be real. Those people are in the extreme minority. The vast majority of Christians subscribe to supernatural claims, miracles, prophecies, etc. That's unarguable, I think. I mean, you could just ascertain that through poll data.
And we're going to get into that aspect in just a moment, but before we go too far from that comment, when you asked me, what did you think about the book?
Yeah.
The dis-ease that I was feeling, the unease, if you like, was I don't have the same fire in my belly to convert people like I did when I became able to say to someone, yeah, I think I'm atheist. Yeah. And part of that was because I felt like I was then becoming an evangelical, but just for the other side. I saw there's so many common traits between saying, come, follow me, do this, leave what you believe. And that's what I'd like you to talk to, if you wouldn't mind, is there a difference, or is it just about you're arguing you're on the side of good and they're not?
There's a radical difference. Here are a few differences. One is, we spoke about this in the car ride, Stephen Molyneux, a Canadian broadcaster, addressed a hit piece that someone did on my job, and he said, if somebody believes the earth is shaped like a banana, and you help them understand that the earth is not shaped like a banana, did you proselytize to them? No. You educated them. So we have a lot of people running around with fantastical, crazy beliefs, and the consequence of that is they think that they're creating lives that are good for themselves, but they're actually not. They're leading away from their own flourishing and the flourishing of their communities. So I look at it as education. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't know of any religion, and if you know of one, please let me know and I can change my beliefs right here on the spot. That'd be great. That values belief revision at its core. The core key from the Delphi Report, which is the American Philosophical Association's largest gold standard report on critical thinking, was that belief revision is a core component of the attitudinal disposition of critical thinking. So I talk about, that's why I was curious as to the expression benefit of the doubt. I think doubt is very valuable. The former head of the Mormons said, doubt your doubt. So doubt has been cast in a bad way. I think doubt can help people overcome dogmatism and break through various cycles, cognitive cycles. So I don't think it's proselytizing in any way. Here's what I think is happening. I think that idea either comes from a misconceptualization of what it is or an egalitarianism, like, oh, just because they're doing this, these people have to do this, or everything has to be equal. Well, everything is not equal. The core of this is how to help people to become more reflective and less dogmatic about what they believe, because the problem is that many people have trapped themselves into a way, just like you had trapped yourself into a way, of thinking about reality, and that is not in their own interest, in their interests of their friends and their families and their communities, and people are getting hurt. And the real tragedy, if you're really sincere and you think about this, the real tragedy is that people think they're living good, decent lives, but it's just based on upon complete silliness. And you only get one life, man. That's it. You get one. And they've chosen to live that life in a way that they think is doing the right thing, but almost to be, unless the universe really is constructed in such a way that Zeus made the whole thing. Almost invariably, the overwhelming majority of people are wrong who have these faith-based beliefs. My personal belief is that they're all wrong. But it is possible that one of these 2,000s of traditions could be correct.
On that, though, this is where I find there's an Australian-ness to this. When I talked about this on 5AA on Sunday night, I got a few callers going and we got riled up, and it was quite interesting. But generally speaking, a lot of Aussies, churchgoers or not, don't say peep about questions of religion, theology, etc. It's almost like you've got to ply them with wine, force their mouth open with some sort of contraption, and force them to get talking about it. So therefore, if they're privately observing some religious following but going about their day job normally, is the damage a little less than if they're actually...
It is.
It is?
It is absolutely, because it doesn't bleed into the public sphere.
Right.
I don't know, I've mentioned this before, I've spoken about this already in my book, I don't know if it's possible to have a private belief. So if you take a step back, I do think that type of secularism, when people keep to an extent, they keep their beliefs out of the public domain, their religious-based beliefs, their faith-based beliefs, I think that's a really good thing. And I'd like to see other communities move that way. And if you look at polling data, I follow Conrad Hackett on Twitter, and he writes about this extensively. If you look at polling data, one of the things you see is that there's a rise of the nuns. But the other thing that you see is that there's...
A rise, of the...
Of the nun, people who don't have a religion or who...
Okay.
Self-described as agnostic or atheist or what have you, although the terminology is a bit problematic because that has associations. But you also see people in closed societies, more totalitarian societies, becoming more dogmatic. And you also see diasporas of people leaving those societies and bringing those faith-based beliefs with them. And I would argue to you that sooner rather than later, you will have to engage those individuals in a substantive way.
Yeah, it's interesting there. Australia's got sort of a long reputation of multiculturalism, and even in Adelaide we see it a lot because we had the immigration camps in post-World War II. I don't think we're yet to see a culture that's actually survived Australia. They come over here, so post-World War II we had a lot of immigrants from southern Europe, so Italy and Greece. Within 2 to 3 generations they're pretty much fully integrated with Australia. 1970s we had a lot of boat people from Vietnam, survived about 1 or 2 generations, and they got completely absorbed into Australia, sort of whether they wanted to or not, to some degree.
That's wonderful, because it speaks to your culture. My concern is that those were not, and I gave a talk about this in Canada, Imagine No Religion 5, is that those are communities that have certain linguistic bonds, less so tribal bonds, but they have certain bonds, but they're not ideologically motivated moral communities. And now you see immigrants that have ideology and religion as their primary motivation. And I'm not talking about what your immigration policy should be, but I am saying that I think we need to have a serious discussion at some point about what that means for the society and how do people engage each other. I mean, what do we do if a man doesn't want to shake the hand of a woman, which is something I experienced recently? I think that needs to be spoken about honestly and openly, and the first step to solve any problem is to be honest about it. And throwing it under the rug is not going to solve the problem.
So the answer, I'm guessing you're not saying the answer is to block people of certain persuasion or background from entering, but more so set the rules of engagement within our society of what we consider the minimum levels of shared moral positions on things?
I can give you my position, and
Sure.
you certainly
Okay.
don't have, and I don't want to be the hegemon, the American hegemon here, but I find it abhorrent that a man will not shake a woman's hand. So one way that you can conceptualize it is you can remove the word woman and put in the word black. So if a man didn't want to shake the hand of a black man, none of us would have any, I would hope that none of us would have any problem repudiating that behavior. But why is that any more okay if it's a woman? I would argue that it's not. And I would argue that hiding behind your religion does not make that okay. So if it's an immutable characteristic, and I think that's the key, if it's something that somebody was born with that they cannot change, sexual orientation, skin color, race, height, those are immutable characteristics, and those should be offered protections within the society. And in civilized discourse, there has to be a moral minimum by which we engage people. Whereas ideas do not deserve dignity. People deserve dignity. And so ideas don't deserve dignity. And we know that people change their ideas because we know that there's an apostasy. And apostasy isn't some Western imperialistic notion. No, those are within those individual cultures. There is, and in many Islamic cultures, the punishment for apostasy is death. So all I'm saying right now is we need to be honest about these problems. We need to face them with sincerity and authenticity. And we need to talk about what sorts of engagements we consider acceptable and unacceptable. And if people want to integrate, I think you need to have a conversation with them about some basics of women's rights, homosexuals' rights, etc. That's my own opinion.
Do we have any tools that are reliable for crafting objective positions on such things? Can we arrive at a point where we can say with great confidence, this is, you can test it as much as you like, but this will always come up objectively true worldwide, universally?
I was right with you at the beginning of the
Okay.
question.
Tear it apart.
True. I think we do. I think that there are ways of applied rationality that we can turn the tools of reason and science on social situations and contextual questions so that we can come to answers that are more likely true and less likely false. Now, that doesn't mean that those rules are immutable, but I think we can rule out certain positions. For example, I think we can rule out cultural relativism, the idea that, well, this culture has this, and I wrote about that in Chapter 8 in my book. I think we can rule out epistemological relativism. Well, they have their ancient book to know, we have the scientific method to know. I think that there are principles of reason that are derivable that govern the social exchange and social intercourse of people, and one of those principles would be on immutable characteristics. I think there are principles that govern the society economically, although those are, I think, less hard and fast. John Rawls is one of my favorite philosophers, and he talks about that in depth. But even before we get to have that conversation, that's a more nuanced, kind of intellectually difficult, complex conversation because it's inherently messy. So we have the scientific method in which we can ascertain things about the world, measurements, etc., and then we can, or empirical knowledge, and then we have the Socratic method, which is a way of asking questions to help us arrive at moral knowledge.
And yet, as much as these tools exist, they will be mediated at a social level through our media, which has devolved, I would argue, into a good guy, bad guy, shoot 'em up cartoon, where I don't think we can sustain good, decent discourse to arrive at these positions because the media has lost the plot. They are plummeting to the lowest common denominator, hand over fist. And that's going to, basically, they make their money by inflaming people's prejudices and fear that they're giving up too much. And so I don't have much hope that we could get to that point.
Okay, well, hold on. Okay, so we need to unpack that. So
Okay.
I think we have a little difference of opinion
Sure.
on that. So people use the word media if it's a singular noun. It's not. It's plural. And we're doing media right now.
We are.
Right? And so there are numerous outlets that people have more options than ever before to access quote-unquote alternative forms of media. So I don't think that there's some hegemonic conspiracy of media. I do think that violence and fires and such get higher ratings.
Yep.
I don't necessarily... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't be suggesting a conspiracy. I think it's happening by default, individually, as they chase dollars to survive. I think it's just in case conspiracy lays too much, and I don't think Mr. Murdoch's trying to plot the overthrow of the world.
He wants to make money. Yeah.
I'd actually suggest that it's evidence-based. Their behaviour is actually evidence-based. The evidence in that case being the amount of money you can get to return to your shareholders. Because at the end of the day, you've got a legal obligation to maximise the profit of your corporation. If you do a particular behaviour and it leads to a greater income, then that would be rewarded as a behaviour that's a good behaviour.
Okay, so let's accept by fiat every single thing that you guys said is true. Doesn't that just contradict the discussion we had before about compulsory voting?
In what way?
You're smiling, so you know the way I'm talking about.
I was arguing that compulsory voting is a good thing because it means that the more vulnerable in society at least get compelled to turn up so they've got a chance to exercise their vote. And you were quite surprised that I was taking that position. I think that's fair to say. I don't see that the what we've just been talking about with the media undermines that. It might mean that if we follow the
lowest common denominator,
if we follow that to the end, then their vote may be...
Then more people, right? So then more people... the level of discourse is lowered. You have more people voting. And so almost by definition, the things they vote upon are capricious or arbitrary. So then you're getting policies then that are subject. So
I see your point. So therefore, we're getting more volume of votes, but not a great quality of vote.
So this is vital that we talk about this now. So you just said to me, I see your point. So what I did with you right now was called an intervention. An intervention was I used a variant of the Socratic method to instill doubt in what you have and to instill doubt in your belief. And the greater the doubt in your belief, the less likely you're to act upon something. So what I did was I found a belief, I took something that can be used as a contradiction, and I used that as a wedge between belief and action. And the idea ultimately is that will help you facilitate belief revision. In the same way that I did that with you, we can do that with prisoners, we can do that with people of faith, we can do that with jihadis, we can do that with everybody. We can use doubt to help people break through dogmatism.
I can see that dynamic at work. That's quite fascinating. When you use that wedge of doubt, it's a catalyst, if you like, for infusing more energy into my brain to say, this is not a done matter. This is worthy some extra activity to check.
And we just need to do a little either preliminary work or we need to do simultaneous work. And the work that we need to do... And you don't need this work done because you don't think that holding a belief about compulsory voting necessarily makes you an awesome person. You might think it's a good belief to hold, and you might think that contributes along with a suite of other beliefs to you being a better person. But part of that work is to help people understand that holding particular beliefs does not make them better people. There's no virtue in that. And that gets back to the quotation at the beginning about faith being a cognitive sickness that's turned into a moral virtue. It's very difficult to dislodge beliefs when people think that the beliefs that they hold are beliefs that make them better people. It's a protective mechanism for the faith virus to prevent itself from being dislodged.
You see this in the discussion of people with faith saying, I'm coming from the moral, where do you atheists get your morals from? You can't have any morals because our morals can only come from, the Holy Book or whatever their belief, their particular system's in. So that's where they sort of tie in of, only good people can hold these beliefs because they come from these scriptures and things. It's along that same line.
And now the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance, where I'm holding things is I'm thinking of a dear friend. In fact, I'm going to mention a question of him later in the program, Max Martin, one of our contributors, who is happily to be announced as Christian. Smart man. I wouldn't want to dishonour him by saying you're suffering a faith virus, but you're going to say to me that I'm probably overlaying that with too much of a character attack and not enough of analysis. No?
So is he your friend?
Yes, he is.
Okay, so you don't need to say he has a faith virus, but if you want to have an authentic relationship with him, then you need to be honest with how you think about the nature of his beliefs. And if you think that he's fundamentally mischaracterized the nature of reality, then if you don't say that to him and say that to him sincerely and gently, then I would argue that he's only your friend in namesake. He's not an authentic friend of yours, and any relationship you have will not be a genuine friendship.
Well, we have had these discussions.
That's perfect. Then you can disagree within that framework.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we both hold our different positions, and we still love each other as friends.
So that's perfect. So you're sincere, and he's sincere, and you've had conversations. And I think that one thing, and again, as you said before, it's less of a problem in Australia, but one thing that I think that we should have is, how do we make our conversations with people more civil? How do we make them less vituperative? How do we make them so that anger doesn't govern those conversations? And because people will listen to that, and we need to... Go ahead.
So a coin just dropped for me. I love having conversation. My favourite way of interacting with people is around a dinner table. That's how I love it. I don't like parties and blah, blah, blah. We can easily engage in political discourse, in all sorts of things, football, sport, marketing, you name it. But I have a fear and trepidation when you get into religious realms that suddenly tempers will flare as people react to feeling threatened. It's almost like a out-of-bounds discussion. It's too personal. We shouldn't attack that. And that's where this civil aspect comes. It's like
That's what my book is about, how to have those conversations with people so that they don't invoke a defensive posture. And you can have very substantive disagreements with people about, really big things like the nature of reality or how did the cosmos come into being. But that's not an excuse not to be kind to people. That's not an excuse not to listen to people. That's not an excuse not to treat people with dignity and respect, which is so frequently exposed in the atheist community.
And to be able to look that friend in the eye that you have a different opinion on and say, I'm not patronizing you, there's nothing patronizing.
And I love you, and you're my friend, and we're buddies. I just have a really substantive difference of opinion than you, and it could be possible that I'm wrong. And maybe you can help me to try to figure out, and maybe we can look at this together, because I really am willing to revise my beliefs on this.
Having drawn him into this, I'll read his question that he submitted for you tonight. He said, I agree that he's picked up some of the premises here from my synopsis of you, so don't go off on him if he's got it wrong. I agree that baseless belief in hope is a dead-end venture, but I also think this is a very different to faith, at least to those who hold the belief that we don't know it all yet. I'm just curious, isn't placing all one's trust in scientific findings that continue to supersede themselves and continue to prove themselves inaccurate also a malaise in itself? And since this is the approach of many uneducated faith haters, doesn't it massively limit thought capacity, as then we could only believe what has been previously shown or proven?
That's a big question. That's about a 2 or 3 parter. So it's a good question, so I could talk about a number of responses to that. So what was his name again?
Max.
Mm-hmm. So Max, one of the things that you may want to think about is Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He wrote a wonderful little book that encapsulated some of those ideas. It's not dated now, but the basic idea in that book was, look, We've been wrong about so many things. We continue to be wrong about things. For example, just to situate this in a context, in my lifetime, I've been told that eggs were good. I had an egg with my Caesar salad tonight. Eggs were good. Eggs were bad. Yolks are good. Whites are good. So I would argue that that process, the scientific process, is a process of belief revision. It is a process of us coming to use a tool word, verisimilitude, or for us revising those beliefs. What beliefs to revise in faith? What is the fact that Jesus rose from a tomb, is that revisable? Is the fact that Jesus walked on water, is that revisable? What questions have been answered by faith? What questions have been answered by science? I don't think that I'm a better person because I value the scientific method. I think I'm less likely to be wrong. And so if we really want to be honest about the nature of the problem, there really is no parity between the things that we can't know for certainty and someone else thinking that they have license to pretend to know things they don't know about how the universe was created. Those things are disanalogous.
It's interesting, because that came up on 5AA this week when I was on. A gentleman called in and said he's heard Richard Dawkins go on about being atheist, etc., and he said, and science, and loving his science, but he said, you can't just take all that away, the explanation that God's behind this, and not have an answer for how life began, what the origin of things are. I didn't get a chance to respond to him. I'd love to know what you would say in that situation, or Nigel.
Yeah, one thing that strikes me there straight away is there's an inherent human desire to actually know something, and there's a very strong issue humans have when they don't know something, because generally evolutionary, it was if you didn't know why that bush was rustling or you didn't know what was going to happen with your crops, it was generally a pretty fatal sort of outcome generally. And so humans tend to have a pretty hardwired approach to a desire to know an outcome or an absolute outcome. And I think the point that's being raised there is if you take away my knowledge in sort of an absolute knowledge about something, what are you going to replace it with? Because as a human, I can't live with, an unknown. It's sort of this existential angst of, I don't know why I'd be here if I wasn't created to be here. And that leads to a lot of sort of disquiet generally within people. And it's not because they necessarily have a real feeling of disquiet about that particular question. It's just that humans, by their nature, if they don't know something from an evolution point of view, was a pretty bad thing. There was a benefit in knowing your environment and knowing.
Because the risks were great if you didn't know.
Yeah, the risk was really great. If you knew something, that was a little bit of a positive. But if you didn't know something, it was a much, much greater negative. And so we've ended up with humans that very much like to pattern match. They like to find patterns where there aren't patterns, and we see this in illusions and seeing, animals in clouds and all that sort of thing. It's a hardwired thing in our brain. So if you take away a reason for belief, the problem is with humans in particular is you're left with this sort of gulf of, I now feel uncertain, edgy. There's a fear of the unknown, which is a common aspect of humans. Humans really are afraid of the unknown because it used to be a fatal issue.
So my question to Peter here is, taking that point that we're not good at not knowing, your whole theme of this tour is how do you know? I don't want to juxtapose two sets here. There's the Uniting Church community. I used to work for them years and years ago, and they came up with this thought that we have to live in the messy middle. We don't know the absolutes on all things. We have to be comfortable in the messy middle. And I hear you talk about we need to have a willingness to reconsider the beliefs that we've decided to hold upon.
What we need to do, and then I want to speak to your comment, what we need to do is we need to proportion our beliefs to the evidence. And we need to do the best that we can to do that. So one should hold the belief in direct proportion to how much evidence one has. Coupled with that is we have to make a virtue as a culture, as a society, as people in the English-speaking world, we have to make a virtue of saying, I don't know. It has to be not only okay, but we have to look at that as laudable. Now, what you said was absolutely true. Michael Shermer's written about that extensively in The Believing Brain and other books. we do have a certain, it's called patternicity and agenicity. We do have a kind of hardwiring for our beliefs. Given that, I would argue to you that it's even more important that we place value on being rational and reasonable and proportioning our belief to the evidence, knowing that we have a kind of cognitive filter or evolutionary filter that weeds out possibilities that may not align with reality. So, and Jonathan Haidt and Steven Pinker and others have written about this extensively. But that's more reason to rely upon the tools of science, because we all have innate biases with it, whatever it is that we have biases.
Of course, and this is where a different sort of messiness arises, because postmodernists, quantum mechanics people will say, how do you know this is reality? You might be talking about reality in objective, natural sense, but we don't really know that's reality. That's not, is that helpful?
Okay, so those two things. So quantum physicists do not say this. Complete charlatans like Deepak Chopra invoke the words quantum, and I gave a talk about this at TAM called Authenticity, invoke the word quantum to justify lucrative nonsense. So we can immediately write that off the table. Just because we can't know the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, like the position of momentum of a particle, nothing follows from that in this world, what Dawkins calls the Middle Kingdom. We can't make any inferences from that. So we've evolved to understand Middle Kingdom physics. Okay, so let's bracket that. We can come back later if you want. So then the first thing that you said was the postmodernism. Postmodernism has largely and fortunately been discredited now. It's a,
hallelujah.
Right? No, I know, right? So we can talk about that, and we can talk about what that means, but I think that was an example of verbal behavior that very few people actually believed, that left a legacy of relativism. It left a legacy of demeaning truth. It left a legacy of not valuing the public understanding of science. It is simply not the case that many of the arguments from which they should be taken by the postmodernists like Derrida, Lacan, Foucault, and others, it is simply not the case that those things should be taken seriously. Let me give you an example. I don't believe that people actually believe most of that stuff. I think it's verbal behavior. Like if someone says to you, "Hey, my system is relative and your system is relative." Oh, great. Okay, great. Look, you really believe that? You take a $20 bill and you go into a bank and you tell them in your epistemic system that's worth $500 bills, and you see. So there are ways to adjudicate these social interactions through the mechanisms that we've already established. Now, somebody listening to that, there are many, many, many responses, but the problem with they're trying to make reason do something that reason doesn't do. They're trying to make the tools of rationality apply to domains of thought to kind of buttress or uphold silliness, but it just doesn't. It doesn't do the work that they think that it's going to do. Hence, it's almost all but virtually dead. Now the remnants, unfortunately, we're still dealing with in our academic institutions today.
And our media, to some extent, the concept of equal footing for stories, the false balance issue we currently have in the media. Yes. Is sort of, I'd argue, is a remnant of the postmodernism approach of, all values are equal, so if you've got two sides to an argument, they must be equal, which is
the
just rubbish.
The BBC has taken a stance against, by the way.
Yes, which is good, and it'd be nice to see that in
they've moved as well.
And the other thing is you can't be both a relativist and an egalitarian.
Yes.
Right? You can't say everything is equal and then say there's no standard by which to judge these cultural practices. But for these people, that doesn't seem... That if there's any benefit of it, that seems to be the benefit of not adhering to the principles of reason and rationalities. You don't have to apply the law of non-contradiction. You can just throw that out the window too.
So when it comes to a tool to help you stay on the narrow path, it's interesting how religious language infiltrates us and the way we think. It's because it's infused into our literature, I imagine. Nigel, in an episode long time ago on this podcast, he talked about when you're up against someone in a conversation and they're being very overconfident and belligerent. He asks, how do you know that 5 times or 6 times or something like that?
6 questions.
And you can get to the truth of it. For someone who is of a faith culture, they can refer to books, theologians, etc. For someone else who wants to go down that pathway of wanting to know, have you got a heuristic or some sort of simple discipline to apply yourself when you find yourself wrestling with a proposition and saying, how do I know? How do I know? How do I get a sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. The first thing you have to do is you really have to be honest with yourself. So you have to cultivate that disposition. And then you have to ask yourself, do I really believe this or do I want to believe it? Do I really believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse? I think that's in Surah 17:1. Or do I want to believe it? Do I really believe this? Now, let's say that the answer to the question is, yeah, I really believe it. Mm-hmm. So that's a litmus, or not litmus test is strong, but that's one of the questions that you can ask as a type of value. The second thing is a defeasibility test. And even asking the question, under what conditions could my belief be false, will create a space of cognitive openness that will allow doubt to penetrate. So the question could be, okay, let's say that somebody could provide you, hypothetically, I'm not saying that I can, but let's say that somebody could provide you with evidence to show that your belief is an error. Would you change your mind? If the answer to that question is no, then the response to that is, well, then that's not why you really believe. Right, so you believe for some other reason. Maybe you believe for emotional valence. Maybe you believe for socially. Your buddies believe this attractive woman you want to date. She believes, and you think that you'll feel better if you believe. So you have to ask yourself, why do you believe? If you honestly believe, and then hit yourself with the defeasibility test. And the other thing is, you don't need, which is, how could my belief be wrong? And you don't need to tell other people this. You can do this in your own head. So those are 2 things, and then I can give you more if you want more, but that's a good start.
I'm going to roll now. Another couple.
So one thing you could do is you could try to generate counterexamples. So one thing people do to dig themselves into cognitive sinkholes is they have a belief and they look for reasons for why that belief is true. But what they should be doing is to look into reasons for why that's false. So I had a talk in Sydney. In Melbourne. Took me a while to say that. In Melbourne. I had a talk in Melbourne.
Melbourne thinks it's Sydney.
Melbourne, in which I think if I knew what you're talking about, I might find that funny, but I don't.
I hear that all the time.
In which the person with whom I was engaged was a Christian, and he said miracles, one of the reasons he believed, and he extended his arm. This will be on video pretty soon. And he had an electricity, and this kid who had some cancer was healed. And so I was very honest, and I said, I actually believe that you believe that. And that's what happens when you start with your belief first, and you seek in your landscape to justify the belief you already have. When you do that, all those things make sense to you in that larger context.
Confirmation bias.
It's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So here's this, one more thing that's really... A friend of mine said something to me, Matt Thornton, that was just so interesting to me. I had been doing this for about 2 years and reading books of apologists and theologians, and I said to him, Matt, it's really interesting. All of this stuff just seems to me like really sophisticated forms of confirmation bias. And he said something that just blew my mind. There's that phrase again. He said, there's nothing sophisticated about it. And I was floored by that. He's right. There's nothing. It's just basic confirmation bias.
Yeah. Yeah, humans, and this comes back to the pattern matching as well,
huh?
is humans like to find information that matches their pre-existing beliefs, because when we evolved, that generally is how the world actually works, is the world does have rules, and it does behave by those rules, independent of humans. So if you get a good year, then you get lots of rain, then you get crops, and that's just a cyclic behavior of the world. And so you get to associate through correlation that, when it rains, something happens. And so humans are very good at finding patterns where there aren't necessarily patterns, because most of the time it's actually correct. Because most of the time our environment we live in is actually repetitive and predictable. The problem is the 9 out of 10 times it's correct is really great. The problem is when you're up at that 1 out of 10 times, you're completely wrong. And so it's a great thing, and it's a heuristic we have is to find patterns in things.
Okay.
But it does lead you on a wrong path potentially of thinking everything is related when they're not.
I've got a couple of last questions to round off with. The first one is a scenario. Let's imagine you're the Prime Minister of a country and you're Catholic.
On an island?
On an island. Okay.
My condolences.
Yes. And for a long time you've held...
immediately changed many of my stances. That was my first order of business.
And
I would apologize to my people. I would say I've made mistakes. I would repudiate past positions. I would give back. I would take the job. I would quit. I would quit. I would resign instantly and with apologies. How am I doing so far?
Very creative as a hypothetical.
Have no fear, it'll never happen.
So you're a Catholic Prime Minister and you've taken a stance saying that you don't believe that humans are responsible for climate change, etc., etc. Then the Pope comes out and says humans are responsible for climate change. How do you... This is interesting, and this must be a situation that people find themselves in from time to time, because right at the beginning we talked about compartmentalizing our religious beliefs and the way we work in our jobs, etc. Here's someone, hypothetically, who's taken a political stance on an issue, and now his religious leader is saying the complete opposite. What goes on in this scenario? What are the tools available to this hypothetical Prime Minister?
It's hard. That's the problem with irrationality. Irrationality is like the horse in Alice in Wonderland that rides off furiously in all directions. So you're asking me a question that when somebody is irrational and they're faced with something that's... So all of a sudden the Pope knows about anthropogenic... I mean, the whole question is absurd. But you're asking me this question, and I'm trying to take it seriously. But given that the whole thing is ludicrous in the first place, it's really an unanswerable question, given that the person subscribes to these positions that are unevidenced or under-evidenced. So you're asking me, what should a person who subscribes to unevidenced beliefs do when somebody who also subscribes to unevidenced beliefs has a belief that happens to probably correlate to reality based on... I mean, the whole question doesn't even make sense.
Well, let me put a different set of glasses on so that we perhaps just filter out the religious or faith aspect for a second, and we look at it in purely political terms.
Okay.
I've often wondered, as I've reflected on the mores of religion going through the years, that it seems that humans do whatever humans do in a society to survive. Hobbesian, the Commonwealth, etc. Give up a little bit of power for the common good and you'll be fine. And then just dresses the cloak of whatever the current religion is to make that take on those views. So whatever you think's right to survive here, suddenly your religious view takes a lot of those virtues on board. And then when it changes the way. Is that sort of what we're seeing here? But in a political sense, we're seeing, for whatever political reason, a position was taken, and now a decision has to be made to move. And so those political...
what's his goal? It depends. I mean, I don't know what his goal is. Maybe his goal is to just make sure that his party gets elected in the next election. And maybe he thinks that if enough people think that... I mean, you have to know what his objective is. But I think another question is, what should his objective be?
I think there's probably 23 million other Australians are asking exactly the same question at this point in time is, what is the goal here? Because I think it's really not clear.
Well, this is about to be played out hypothetically with our hypothetical character. One of the people in our...
The rest of us in reality land have got to live with the outcome here.
Yeah, now I'm not going to be able to get back on the plane.
One of our people in our Facebook community, whose name I'm not sure I'm pronouncing correctly, Hida Gastra, actually made a comment as we were asking people for any questions, and just said, have you got some niggling questions about, quoting me, have you got niggling questions about your beliefs? Are you at a crossroads? Do you have some questions you'd like to challenge a non-believer with? And Hida says to me, why are you leaving out the atheists that are confident in their beliefs for asking questions? I assume that was done unintentionally. Yes, it was. Thank you, Hida. But here's a question. What are some of the lesser-known, most hopeful stories and facts you've come across that indicate that atheism/secularism is on the rise and/or that atheist activism is working?
Oh boy, that's a great question with a very conspicuous, obvious answer. The global data, the Pew polls that I talked about repeatedly, and I talked about this with Philip Adams too on Late Night Live, those data are pretty clear. There's a rise of the nuns and a decrease in people who self-report as religious. I can speculate as to the causes of that, but ultimately I don't really know the cause. I don't think anybody knows the causes of that. Even when you ask people, they give different reasons, but we know for a fact that that data is out there and that religiosity is decreasing and agnosticism and atheism is increasing. As to the first part of the question about people being confident, I think that gets back to the definition of atheism. I'll give you my definition. It doesn't have to be your definition. I'll give you mine. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that there's enough evidence to warrant a belief in God, but if I were given the evidence, I'd change my mind. So I don't hold. I just think there's not enough evidence. In the same way that I think there's not enough evidence for the existence of werewolves. But if you say, hey, we got in the bush on here, we got a bunch of werewolves, they're biting people, they're turning into,
zombies or
lycanthropes or whatever they're called. Yeah, and then we could take a look at that evidence. But I actually assign werewolves a much higher probability in the existence of God. But to go back to the question, I think that data is there, and it's Google. 5 minutes on Google should be able to find it.
The final question then, I've got two little girls, 7 and 5.
Oh, good.
I would like them to grow up having a good, robust, critical thinking framework to approach life, just so they don't fall victim to dominant thoughts that aren't necessarily good. I'd like them to weigh them up for themselves. How old are they when they're old enough to cope with this sort of thinking? And secondly, how do you start infusing that?
I don't think anyone is ever too young to be taught to value certain attitudinal dispositions which will lead them to have beliefs that are less likely to be false. I know that was a mouthful, so I apologize for that sentence. That was a big sentence. I think the way to do that is to talk about values with them. It's not to give them values. Right. It's not to give them skill sets. It's to give them values. The problem is that if somebody has a skill set and they don't have the values, they're not going to use the skill set, particularly if something has an emotional resonance with them. So you have to talk to them about what it means to hold a belief dogmatically, why evidence is important, what the scientific method is. Only subsequent to belief revision, be trustful of reason. Once we teach children that, then we can go back and revisit those skill sets that they can then apply in various arenas of their lives.
Peter, thank you so much for taking us on that journey.
Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that.
This train will depart in 4 minutes. First stop, Woodville, then St Clair, Cheltenham, Alberton, Port Adelaide.
And now it's time to think. Reflections about our society by self-confessed policy wonk and public transport user, George Inglis.
Good evening, gentle listeners. It seems the team at the Adelaide Podcast is determined to knock down all and every Adelaide taboo with religion next against the wall. Good. The quicker we can exorcise the cringeworthy title of City of Churches, the better. Even the insipid festival state is vastly preferable, and putting aside the small matter of human tragedy, there's more than a few morbid tourism dollars in the moniker Australia's serial killer capital. But like them or not, it's certainly true that Adelaide is long on lovely old churches. We've got a lot of bog-ugly new ones too, but the stats don't bear out Adelaideans being any more religious than our interstate God-bothering brethren. In fact, if you believe the old adage that religion is the opiate of the masses, then you'd have to say that we've found a new favourite drug. If there's one thing going up faster than bog-ugly churches in Adelaide, it's small bars. Adelaide CBD is quickly becoming a mecca for pilgrims coming to pray at the altar of alcohol. In just the last few weeks, a new microbrewery bar opened up to breathless worship in social media, and immediately the acolytes and heretics were at war, this time quarrelling about whether the small bars phenomenon represented our city's resurrection or a modern retelling of Sodom and Gomorrah. But if you don't drink in Adelaide, don't feel you have to repent just yet. You can always fall back on our other favourite vice, partisan politics. The politics of extreme opposition, once the exclusive realm of US tinfoil hat nutters, is now here with Old Testament vengeance. You think I'm exaggerating? Asked David Washington about some of the comments he'd have censored from In Daly's august pages when some boffin established that the four horsemen of the apocalypse did not actually descend upon Adelaide when a small part of Frome Road was given over to bicycles. Seriously, defending cyclists, and God forbid the Frome Street Bikeway, has become the Adelaide equivalent of passing wind in church, only vastly more taboo. It's the same with any topical issue you care to mention: economic development, heritage, wind farms. You can't air a point of view without being assumed into one tribe or another, then expected to fight alongside your adopted tribe, regardless of how many of your other views might align with those of your new brethren. Political tribalism is the new religion, and is possibly just as dangerous as the old one. It asks us to accept absolutes, to take things on faith, to sacrifice individual thought for a perceived and possibly imaginary future benefit. Perhaps Voltaire was right when he said that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. We've cast aside the gods of old and created our own temples of self-righteousness, from where we exclude and belittle anyone with different views. Is this because our old institutions, including religion, are collapsing? Are we trying to rebuild our own internalised micro-institutions around our newly liberated beliefs and recruit others to those beliefs? And if so, are we any better off in our current age of reason? I'd wager not. We need to rethink how we debate the big issues in society without the strictures of religion giving us at least some moral boundaries. I believe humanity can flourish in the absence of religion, but the more salient question might be, do we choose to?
And it's that time of the week again for Is It News. We go through three headlines of years long gone. Two of them are real, or two of the stories are real and one of them is fake. So the headlines might have not existed in reality or not, but the substance of the stories can be different.
Okay, and the theme tonight is faith, I believe.
Is faith? Yes, it is indeed.
Perfect. Thank goodness you're here, Peter.
Well, thank you.
I would have been stranded.
I can help to adjudicate this.
No, Peter's answer.
Historical esoterica.
Peter's answer, they're all faith, they're all false. Okay, let's hop into this.
Okay, the first story tonight we have is from the news, the 15th of September, 1932.
Oh, okay.
Faith healer in Adelaide suburbs.
That's the headline?
That's the headline. I'll give you a little blurb of the first sentence. John Madison, faith healer, is to visit Adelaide suburbs, and through him a modern miracle is to be seen. Bobby, a crippled boy, is his subject, and his faith in John Madison is unbounded. Here's the first headline.
I have to say plausible.
I say false. It has all the reeks of false to me.
Now, here's the question.
Yeah.
Is the news story plausible as opposed to the actual truth or otherwise of the content?
The news story is not plausible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I ask how you're judging that on such little evidence thus far?
Sure, unless it... So my evidence for that was that no faith healers don't do that. They wouldn't say they had faith in somebody. They say that they had faith in Jesus and they channeled it. Now, maybe the person who wrote it didn't write it correctly. I don't know. But I'm fairly confident that story is false.
Interesting. Okay. Number two.
Second headline, finance and faith. This is from the news, the 29th of August, 1927.
Oof. Wow.
Apostles of gloom have been experiencing a riotous time in Adelaide recently. For weeks, the people generally, especially those in business heart of the city, seem to be attacked by a disease of despair, which has been spread with amazing rapidity by the dismal prophets who abound in every city.
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, neither do I. But that's 1920, was it?
1927.
So the Great Depression...
hadn't happened yet.
Hasn't happened yet.
No.
So we had the Great Depression. You had the Great Depression as well in America, didn't you?
We all had it.
Not that you were alive at that point, I'll hasten to add.
Thank you.
So this is plausible. I actually think that's quite plausible. But I've said that for two of them thus far, because
I could have been wrong about the first one. I don't know.
You could have been. Yeah. I'm withholding judgment just yet. I'm waiting for more evidence.
Fair enough.
Before I judge.
I can see you've learned. Yes. This has been a very productive hour we've spent together.
That's right.
I think that's plausible. It's just so unintelligible that I don't really think I understood it.
The third one is above man-made laws. Criticism of faith healing refuted. And this is Christian Science beliefs. So, Christian scientists in Adelaide warmly rebuked reflections made upon their faith by a London author, Mr. Hal Fisher, in Our New Religion, a book to be published shortly.
And this was in the Christian Science Monitor or something?
No, this was actually in the Mail, which was an Adelaide newspaper, from the 16th of November, 1929.
He's got me 3 for 3. I'm actually thinking this is plausible as well.
Who rebuked that? The Christian Scientists rebuked that?
The Christian Science, at the time, I found out the Christian Science was quite big in Adelaide. And their beliefs were being refuted at the time.
By a writer in London that was saying?
Yes, generally by Christians. This is sort of an inter-Christian rivalry thing that happened.
So one of these is true.
Two
of these are true.
2 are true, 1's false.
I would say 2 and 3 are true, and 1 is false.
And you're sticking with 1. Okay. Just give us one quick pinch of extra data for each of them, and then we'll make our final decision.
What are your preliminary...
At the moment, I'm still thinking all 3 of them are plausible.
Okay.
I have no dominant gut feel yet.
And you have no deference to my judgment, which is actually good.
I'm trying to maintain that.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, we'll go back to the first.
I asked myself...
By the way, that's when people's problems begin, when they start deferring to people in those
Believing other people.
Good.
I just asked myself, what would Socrates do?
That's good. WWSD.
Yes. And which happened to be my initials, SD. Wow.
That couldn't possibly be coincidence.
It couldn't.
So going back to the first one, Faith Healer, Adelaide Suburbs.
Yes.
Today, if you ask any reputable psychiatrist if it is possible for a paralytic to be cured by a sudden shock by good news, such as the invigorating assurance that he will recover, and the psychiatrist will say, certainly, this science is still in its infancy, but more is to be learned about the strange workings of the human mind, working so much more mysterious and more powerful than men are wont to believe.
All right, that's
the miracle
causing
by
me
John
doubt.
Madison upon Bobby is to be seen... ...
So this is not about faith healing. This is about psychiatry and giving jolts to the brain. In 1937? 1932, it was a fairly pioneering procedure back then.
I think I'm going to have to revise that belief.
Wow, this is evidence.
That's right. In the light of new evidence, right? I think I'm going to have to revise that belief.
Because from what I can pick up from the little bits of popular reading I've done in that field of psychiatry, that was the heady day. These were the heady days, when they were doing zapping of people's brains and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that early piece was this little boy who is the patient, has amazing faith in this doctor. It's a bit mixed up.
It is mixed up, but that makes... So the original reason that I thought that was false no longer holds. So I'm thinking that that's true.
Right. So you really have modified your belief.
I really have. Right.
Whereas I have had the splinter of doubt wedged between my initials.
Excellent. Excellent. Wow, this has really been an eye-opening interview for you. I mean, this has really been a very substantive. That's good.
This is life-changing. Okay, move on to the next one. See if something...
Finance and faith.
Finance and faith. Oh, yes.
This is the 1927. Unfortunately, they have been persuaded by some people to believe in their whisperings because the usual seasonal dullness of trade has been accentuated by the restriction of credit accompanied by certain measures of depression in some sections of the business world. This has been seized upon by the pessimists and croakers to disseminate all manner of wild rumours respecting the financial stability of many large and important business houses in Adelaide.
All right, here's my dilemma with this one, Peter.
Yeah, and then I have one too.
We're on the cusp of the depression, but they didn't know that. And this story is saying how this is actually suggesting that people were seeing the end being near.
Yep.
I don't think in the history of the world...
And saying it wasn't warranted.
...anyone has seen one of the big collapses coming in the financial markets. Our greed or whatever always blinds us to it. So at the moment... This is making me think that that's not quite right. There's something about it.
Yeah, I think I picked up... You articulated it very well. I picked up on that a little bit, but to me, what was do you have the expression fishy? Do you use the word fishy like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was fishy to me about that was it didn't seem that the first part that he read and the second part, they comported very well in terms of writing style, so I think that's fake.
Oh, so what's that discipline called when you're going into the writing styles?
I don't have any idea.
Hello. All right, so...
Well, that was your observation, was actually took more kind of acumen, took more...
So we have greater doubt around this one.
I do.
Yep.
I do.
Hit us with the last one. Icing on the
was
cake.
the above man-made laws, criticism of faith healing refuted, and it goes on to, in reply, Christian scientists declare that Mr. Fisher has misconstrued the real purpose of their doctrines. To his reflections on faith healing, they retort, it is the absolute conviction of the very power and presence of God which heals so-called incurable diseases and therefore proves the science of Christianity to be above and not dependent on man-made regulations.
Yeah.
I actually think that is 100% plausible. That's a true story.
That's a true one.
Because those sort of tits and tats, backs and forths happen all the time, especially with those fringe movements where they can feel persecuted by the orthodoxy, and that's...
They got science in their name, Steve.
I know they have, but they have got science in their name. So number 3 is off the table. We both agree that's true. It's between 1 and 2. The first one, the headline was about... What was the gist of that one? There's the faith healer, and the psychiatry.
And we thought it was false. Now we thought it was...
I'm going to go out on a limb.
Yeah.
I'm saying number 1 is false, because all that mumbo-jumbo about psychiatry, I'm actually wondering whether you've jumbled things over and crossed your own wires and concocted a Franken story.
Okay.
That's what I think is the case.
Franken story.
Peter?
Wow.
This is the test.
Yeah, well,
this will determine whether people go and see you or not.
Oh, no! I was thinking, it's funny, it's like... you're a very affable guy, and I think if people like you, they're more like to say, that's right. So I'm finding myself slipping into, that sounds like a good idea to me.
Steve's a good guy. You can trust him.
Yeah. Well, now that makes me not trust that answer.
I've got a great car. Perfect for you.
So I don't place much confidence in this, but I think that's right. I think number 1 is the fact. I'm going to change my mind yet again. So actually, that's really good. So we had the first
the first pass.
And then I said, false. Then we had the second thing, and then I said true. And then I listened to your reasoning, and I said false. So I revised it on the basis of incoming evidence. Now, unfortunately, if it turns out that I was wrong, then the lesson there will be lost, and people saying, like, see, you should, And
I think the lesson is you've got to have some way of measuring the quality of the evidence, because your evidence has made the final decision is my utterings into 2 bottles of wine.
Yeah,
and
I
don't think that's necessarily the greatest way that you'd plot a decision-making process.
Yeah, that's also true. And remember, we have a skilled interlocutor here who's intentionally trying to deceive us.
True.
And I think when you know that, it both makes it easier and more difficult for him to accomplish that.
So we're both locked in together.
Yes.
Peter and I will go down together.
Okay, here we go.
He looks a bit cocky.
We will start with above man-made laws.
This is number 3.
Faith healing refuted, the number 3.
And
that is indeed a true story.
Well done, Peter.
We had about 10 years of bun fight at least 10 years between the Christian scientists.
10 years of what?
Bun fight, like just argy-bargy fighting.
Bun fight.
Yeah.
We don't have that saying in America?
No.
Bun fight.
No, it's an Australian one, that one.
Oh.
The Christian scientists were trying to bring out faith healing, and they were pretty big in South Australia, and the Christians were actually pretty much against it, saying it doesn't work, there's no evidence, etc., which is sort of ironic.
Since when, I know what you're going to say, since when would evidence?
Yeah. Since when does the word evidence mean that?
All right.
That actually was a true story, and the Christian scientists were being attacked for their bizarre beliefs in faith healing by the Christians.
I can't wait now.
I know, I'm anti.
Come on,
actually,
we've lost our focus.
Story number 2,
which was
finance and health.
Yes, finance.
Is indeed true.
Congratulations, Peter Boghassian. You and I have triumphed.
Excellent.
And the story behind that is...
Excellent.
But hang on, we might have got there through accidental means.
I know that's actually
there's a twist to this story as well.
Okay.
The second story is indeed true. There was pessimism, and the story goes on eventually, as most article back then sort of people seem to have a thing called they could pay attention to things, which seems to have gone these days. Eventually, towards the end of the story, it says, yes, banking institutions have cried, halt, you're spending too much money, you're in debt too much, you can't keep on doing this. And so there was some sort of peddling in the story saying, actually, maybe you should listen to some of these pessimists. They might actually have a point because the bank is actually measuring the amount of money you're in debt to, and it's too much by a mile. So, but that was true. People were being pessimistic. Actually, 2 years before the time, seeing that the way our economy is going is potentially not sustainable, and we should probably not.
So I'm curious, listening to us reason through those, did our reasoning process make sense to you?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, perfect. Yeah. Because, like, historically, like, we didn't see...
And there I'm surprised that it did. I'm like, oh, really? Our reasoning process made sense.
The 87 crash we didn't see. 2008, there was very few people who saw it coming. Like, the bankers were all, it's all fantastic, it's all great. And the number of people who actually said, oh, no, this is a disaster, you count on one hand.
The only thing that tempers that is... there are naysayers all the way through. The fact that that story picked up the naysayers and they happened to be right. I mean, So anyway, last one. Just how do we get it?
Now, which means the first story here is actually a false story, as in there wasn't faith healers in Adelaide. And this took me a while to get my head wrapped around. Whatever they were talking about, and this is the words they used. So there was a bit in it that also said. An occurrence of such as this, and this is about the little boy being healed, would have been laughed at a decade ago, but during the past 10 years, a new science has sprung up, the science of the human mind that is determined to explain authentic cases of mental healings. You then go, so you think, okay, there's some sort of sciencey thing behind this. Science is in its infancy, but more will be learned about strange workings of the human mind that's so much more serious and more powerful than men are wont to believe. And then it goes on, and this was the dinger that got me. This miracle by John Maddison upon Bobby is to be seen in The Miracle Man, which is to traverse the star circuit of theatres, etc., etc. Opens in St. Peter's Capitol Theatre and the new town.
There's a movie.
And from IMDb is where I eventually got to the bottom of what the hell they were talking about here, because I was like, what is this about faith healers and everything? This was actually written as some sort of real story, as if there was a faith healer going around.
Really?
But it was actually written as sort of a double entendre sort of thing about a movie that was opening at the time called The Miracle Man. And from IMDb, a gang of crooks evade the police by moving their operations to a small town where the gang's leader encounters a faith healer and uses him to scam gullible public of funds for a supposed chapel. Wow. So the actual story is actually about a movie about a faith healer who gets scammed by a mob of crooks trying to encourage him to rip off money from people.
Wow, that's
and I wrote this up.
Abstraction that's
bizarre. I go through this thing every week, going through the newspapers, and they're all really straightforward stories, apart from the English, which is horrendous, and the headlines, which will have multiple headlines talking about the same thing.
Wow.
Here's a situation where whoever was the writer at this time actually wrote up this as if it was a real story, and effectively it was actually an advert for a movie that was starting up in the cinemas at the time.
That's great. That's good marketing. So my marketing hat goes on there, and I think that is superb marketing.
That was really good. I don't think I would have gotten that without you.
Thank you, Peter.
That's true.
I'm going to treasure that little snippet and play it to my girls when they're 18 and 21.
And the movie
questioning my wisdom.
The movie stars Boris Karloff.
Oh, wow.
Boris Karloff was actually in that movie.
The equivalent today is with Jurassic Park, whatever it is, out at the moment, and someone writing that a park full of dinosaurs has broken out and blah, blah, blah. That's the equivalent today. It's fantastic.
Written up as if it was a real thing, but it was actually a sort of a...
Well done.
Thank you.
Mr. Nigel, and well done.
Congratulations on picking the fishy story.
Hi, it's Andrew Reimer from Adelaide's 5AA. You're listening to The Adelaide Show.
And remember, when it's finished, tune in to me.
Oh, yeah, and remember, when it's finished, tune in to me on Adelaide's 5AA.
Time now for the Adelaide Visa Council. This is the segment where we look at what people are saying about Adelaide on social media, Twitter in particular, and we determine whether claims about Adelaide are justified or not, with Adelaide visas hanging in the balance. And our first of all, we should mention Peter Boghassian is our co-counsellor tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a harsh judge.
Yeah, and you're going to bring the Socratic method.
I'm a fair judge.
The Socratic method in our court for the first time ever. Here we go.
Not another hanging judge.
No.
Let's do it.
Okay, the first defendant we have this week is Farah.
Death.
Nigel, your judgment?
Hang them.
Okay, is Farah, and the Twitter handle is Lego Farah. And Lego was in a conversation with someone saying, blah, 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 don't tell me it's a coincidence. And here's the statement that got her in front of the council. Adelaide is too quiet, really. So boring. But the people here are amazing. So here's a delicate balance. Adelaide is quiet and boring, but the people here are amazing. So my question to Farah was, interesting juxtaposition. What does the city need to be interesting? But it looks like Farah has since deleted her tweet.
No way. Okay, so that does not... I was going to pass a judgment very quickly. She was going to be fine, but now she's hiding.
And what are you basing that upon?
Well, why? Because you responded to her, right? And then she deleted it.
Social ostracism.
Now, whether those two actions are related...
Right, well, what you would have to know to have more data is whether or not she deleted other tweets.
True.
But we don't have that data. But I don't know. Young person, I'm disappointed. Farah, I'm a little disappointed in the deletion.
All her other tweets seem to be up there. So her account's still working. It's just that one has gone. So, sorry, what was your judgment again? Your deliberation?
Well, we want to show her that her assessment was correct. 2 of the 3 people making this judgment are from Adelaide. I am now in Adelaide. Would you say that people are amazing?
Yeah.
I think you guys are awesome. You guys are amazing. And we want to buttress that belief, so I think that's great. Just a thumbs up.
I did not see that judgment coming. Because I was so focused on her claiming Adelaide was boring and quiet.
No.
You've picked up on the other. Okay.
But so, one of the criterion was whether or not that was good for Adelaide.
Yes.
And I think it's very good when people are amazing. I think that's great.
And I would argue that I would take amazing people over an amazing city any time. Because amazing people, you can be anywhere. You can be in the...
And if you have amazing people, I don't see how people could be both amazing and it could be boring.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, is if you've got amazing people, you'll have an amazing city. I think she fell into the old trope of, Adelaide's boring, and then when she was questioned about it, realised what she'd done and said, and realised, actually, Adelaide isn't boring, because it's full of amazing people, because the city is the people who are in it, and she's already admitted that the people are amazing, and it's like,
So you think she was trying to hide that?
How can you have a boring city if you've got full of amazing people? And she realised her mistake and hit the delete.
So Peter's voting for an Adelaide visa. Your vote?
I'll vote no, case to answer for.
So I've got to make a decision then.
Well, last week you got off scot-free.
So you voted no?
No case to answer.
So
he's neutral.
He abstained.
He's abstained, basically.
Yeah.
He's weaseled out.
Is that an Australian thing? No case to answer?
It's just in our court.
Oh, okay. Right.
I am the law.
Okay.
So I now have to make a decision. And look,
can I petition you?
Please.
I would say in this case, I would ask you to show compassion.
On what grounds?
Ooh, here we go. Some evidence would be required
As
here.
the type of man you are. Because now...
That's a logical fallacy, a personal appeal.
No. So let me extend that a little bit. So now we have a young person who is perhaps confused, right? She's perhaps a little confused, but that really would let her know that the people of Adelaide are not just amazing. We're forgiving. We are forgiving people.
As well as amazing.
Yeah.
We're generous people.
I hear what you say.
Uh-oh.
And it is actually in harmony with the higher purpose of the Adelaide Visa Council, which is to warm people's hearts towards Adelaide. And therefore, I'm casting my vote with you. And so congratulations to Farah. You have been granted an Adelaide visa.
I don't know why I'm embarrassed to say that. I'm so happy about this. I really wish I wasn't as happy as I am, just elated right now.
All right, well, wait for the next defender. This might change your tone altogether. The next case we have is from Mikey Nicholson. And Mikey tweeted a photograph of a church. It's a church, and this is... He hasn't called Adelaide boring. He's got a picture of a church. I think it's called Clayton West. I could be wrong. It's at the end of the parade on Portrush Road, where the intersection there. I'm not sure where the church is. Adelaideans would know it. And there are signs up the front.
You got a picture there, Steve? You got a picture there?
I have got a picture there.
Can I have a look at it?
You can have a look. Come around. Come, fellow councillors, and have a look. This is the picture of the church.
Okay, yep.
Here's the tweet. Always good to see a church embracing diversity, with the hashtags Marriage Equality, Refugee Week, Adelaide. So I particularly picked up this tweet and the next one because they are of this nature and they bring into focus some of the topics you're here to talk about, Peter. So as far as Adelaide is concerned, actually I'm putting you in the hot seat tonight. How do you react to this from an Adelaide perspective? A church going out there saying marriage equality, refugee week, Adelaide.
How did you pick this up with our sort of test is Adelaide and boring in the same sentence?
I was just going to ask that. I thought that was the...
I changed the rules.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
And I used the search terms Adelaide and church because, happily, and this would also make you choke with joy, Peter, given the last reaction, there weren't many... Well, there was only 2 people talking about Adelaide and boring in the last week. And the other one was in relation to a football game, which is neither here nor there. So our work is yielding fruit.
I can see that.
Yes.
I can see that.
So I had to...
Maybe through a type of terror, because people are afraid that they're going to... So the church is advocating...
marriage equality and supporting refugees. So I just like a reflection on that.
Okay, so now that you've changed that one rule... You have to give me the purpose of this again?
Okay.
Does this contribute to the well-being of Adelaideans?
Yes. We still look at it from an Adelaide perspective. Whether or not you bring in faith, religion and other aspects, it's up to you.
What type of a church is it?
It's a uniting church.
That's a weak Protestant church these days. Uniting form from Anglican, Church of England?
No, nothing. It was Presbyterian, Methodist. And another lot.
Yeah, so minorly confused. Thanks for that, getting that joke. So I guess
Congregationalists.
It's hard for me to. God, I'm taking this way too seriously.
I want you to. I was hoping you would.
Okay, well, I am taking this first because revoking somebody's status as an Adelaidean is, even though I'm not an Adelaidean, that's a pretty serious thing to me. So I have to take this. You're asked for my counsel, so I feel it incumbent upon me to take this very seriously. So let's see. So
we're used to bowing to our American overlords, so this is all just
please. So this is the coalition of the willing. Okay, so so there. I guess I would need to know what other beliefs that they have, like, and given that I don't know that, you can't put a nice face on something that is otherwise ugly. But I don't know if it's ugly. So I have to abstain.
For lack of evidence. You don't know. You don't have enough evidence to base a decision upon.
I would need a richer picture. And just because somebody has a conclusion that happens to be one that accords with my own, that doesn't give them a pass for the other things they do. And it is entirely possible that conclusion was not a reasoned one. So I really can't say in this decision. I have to abstain.
Peter, Nigel?
I would go along exactly the same line. Like was it club of churches, branch of churches? What do you call a collection of
denomination?
Churches? Denomination of churches. I should know, as I was in my school was one of them. They've always been on the more progressive side of society anyway. Mm-hmm. But that still doesn't actually overcome, everything else associated with it. Like, you don't actually need the religion to realise that inclusiveness is a good thing, and diversity is a good thing anyway. It's not something they can claim as moral high ground on. I'd be saying no case to answer.
So you've both voted that, leaving me as a lone voice crying in the wilderness and unable to affect change. So we'll leave that one as no case to answer.
Still is a great thing. Like, it's good to see the church encouraging diversity and actually willing to change their minds, because I don't think you'd find a church willing to say that, say, 30 years ago. that they would encourage same-sex marriage. So it's great that they're slowly changing their mind.
But isn't it sad that we have to say, "Oh yeah, look at this. This is great." I mean, it just shows that the history of a lot of these policies have been misguided. One of the examples of what happens when that sort of irrationality is.
Yeah. And it did take so long. It's a generational sort of change. It'd be nice if it would happen quicker than that. But a lot of these things seem to take sort of a generation or two for what would appear to be to some people be really obvious changes. Is like, well, yeah, why do you ever discriminate against those people?
All right.
Next person.
Let's move on to our last order of business, which is we have Peter Boghassian here with us. He is a visitor. Does he warrant an Adelaide visa, Nigel? Is he doing work in Adelaide that helps Adelaide? And remember, you have to answer on behalf of all Adelaideans. And this is your sole vote. I can't vote.
Wait, why can't you? Why can't you vote?
Because I'm also a very benevolent dictator.
So, I thought it was interesting that you didn't offer me an opportunity to plead my case.
That is my fault. Could you plead your case, please? Why do you warrant an Adelaide visa, Peter Boghassian?
Well, I'm not going to argue for the fact that I warrant one or not. But my question to you is, do you think the work that I do ameliorates human suffering? Do you think the work that I do is actually effective in helping people to align their beliefs with reality and thus create better lives for themselves and better communities? Do you think the work that I do helps people make better decisions because they can weed out alternatives in their lives that are false? If the answer to that question, Your Honor, if you've answered yes to the answer of that question, then I think indeed I should be given at least a temporary visa to commingle with the citizens of Adelaide.
Just before you give us your judgment, Nigel, I'll make an observation from the court. I think Peter's been practicing his speech when he's at the pearly gates in front of St. Peter.
Yeah.
Just between you and me.
This is, what's the name of his paradox called again? Just in case you're wrong.
Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager, yeah. There's a bit of a practice of Pascal's wager here.
So what do you think? They're a very compelling argument, plea. Not that I want to lead the court.
No, well, I have to be totally straightforward with the fact that I actually work in the area of basic rationalism and creative thinking and critical thinking and decision-making and things.
So you're accusing yourself from voting?
I'm going to vote, even though I'll tell people I have a completely biased vote on this particular one. No, I think, and I came to this conclusion many years ago, the most important thing we can do, or one of the most important things we can do, is to actually teach people how to think better. Because a lot of the time people get very hung up on particular issues and they get very focused on whatever it is in their life, and they'll argue the point rather than necessarily arguing the reasons. And they won't necessarily investigate the reasons on why they believe, or they won't necessarily be willing to understand why someone else would believe something as well. Okay. So I've got to say, anyone who encourages people to question their own beliefs, to seek the evidence, and to gain some sort of illumination as to why they believe something, and potentially be okay with the fact that you're allowed to change your mind, would always get my vote as someone who's willing for a Adelaide visa.
I would like to say, therefore, having heard your pleading...
It's like the greatest honour
Peter.
ever to be bestowed upon me. I am totally stoked about this right now. Radically disproportionate to any conceivable... I am so happy about this.
Well, on behalf of the Adelaide Visa Council, Peter Boghassian, congratulations. You are now a holder of an Adelaide visa.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's an honour. Thank you.
Finally tonight, the musical pilgrimage, Peter, in your honour, we've dug out a band. This is an album that was released last year from memory. The group's called Satan's Cheerleaders. You're not offended by us choosing a band with that name?
No.
Nigel, you know one of the players.
Saxophonist is from the United States. Yep, big hi to Jamie, who actually became an Australian citizen a couple of months ago.
Oh,
wow.
So he's been over here for a few years now. He's actually a woodwind instrument repairer. So he has those skills that are extremely bizarrely rare, because how many people do you know who can do that sort of thing?
None.
And, and so he's moved over with his partner and has decided to call Adelaide home as a great place to live.
That's a great story for Peter here, because he started today with an Adelaide visa.
Yep.
And he can move up to Australian citizenship.
Citizenship.
Or is it the other way around?
It can be done. There's actually quite a few people I know from America who've given up on America and come over here.
All I'll say about this band, what I love about them is they are consummate musicians. They play jazz-infused, all sorts of genre from there. Jazz is the foundation, I think, the way they're very tight, orchestrated.
Jamie's a big fan of jazz. He plays a very good sax, and the whole band is actually very accomplished musicians, actually. They're very good.
The track is called Nothing. And one last question to throw at you, Peter, without notice.
Sure.
Something I hear often is, if you don't believe in an afterlife and God and heaven and all those things, and you live on this planet, and when you die, it's curtains, there's nothing.
Okay.
How do you find meaning in life? How do you find a purpose to live?
You don't need a delusion for a higher meaning. You don't need a fairy tale. Anybody can make any meaning they want. Some people have made meaning for well, just like you said, your friend had meaning in his life because he fixes instruments. He likes that. He became, I assume you take a citizenship. Yep. So he found meaning in his life. Anybody can find meaning in their lives, and what we need to do so that we can enable ourselves to find meaning is to stand on our own 2 feet, like your story that you said about the taxi cab, and to start making decisions on our own and not praying about decisions, but to honestly reflect on the type of people we want to become. So there is no objective meaning that's out there, but we all choose our own meaning, and you can have any meaning you want, just like you can have any type of relationship you want. You can have any meaning you want if you're capable of making a mature choice and you're honest with yourself.
But there's one final strand, and it came up in the conversation on 5AA this week too, about the difference between faith and religion. And you're very clear in your book, The Manual How to Raise Atheists, that you're attacking the concept of faith, the practice of faith.
Atheists, right.
You're not trying to sever people from their religious community.
That's absolutely correct.
Why is that such an important distinction?
Because religion is community, religion is friendship, religion is family, and there are some very lovely things about that. The problem is when those things are related to supernatural beliefs. We can all have communities in which we participate that can be very fulfilling and very meaningful. Those communities will eventually erode, decay, and be reduced to former ashes of what they were, be reduced to former shadows of what they were once faith falls from the equation. So the problem is under-evidenced or unevidenced belief, and we really don't need to worry about religion as much. The other thing is all religions, or virtually all religions, maybe except Unitarian Universalists, they are held up by that support beam of faith. And once people start being more honest and more reflective, the beam falls and religion will fall with it. And they can replace those communities and have other meaningful relationships with people that aren't based on delusion or superstition or fairy tales.
Well, let's sing a song, or hear a song that honours that, at least in title, the Nothing song, which actually doesn't really honour that. You're talking about, well, actually, yeah, once you remove that community, you've left with a vacuum for a bit until you can find another community to be part of.
And people can fill those, sewing communities, bridge communities, jiu-jitsu. You can always find ways, especially now with the internet.
That's true. Even Jamie repairing woodwind instruments, etc.
Yeah.
Which just proves, even to this day, the answer is blowing in the wind. Here's Nothing, Satan's Cheerleaders. It's Nothing, Satan's Cheerleaders, Adelaide band. I believe just recently they played at the roller derby shindig competition.
Last weekend they were playing there.
Yeah, fantastic. They get around a bit. Peter Boghassian, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and thoughts tonight.
This was a great time. You guys are great, and I am now an honorary
Adelaidean,
and I feel deeply. I don't know. I'm very excited about that.
I'll just say this: when you go to Adelaide Airport, when you're flying out, just go up to anyone and say, "I hold an Adelaide visa. Give me free chocolate or wine
Free
or
wine."
I don't know that you.
I would never abuse. Now that you've conveyed this honor upon me, I would never abuse it in such a gratuitous way.
You're worthy of more than just an Adelaide visa. Thank you so much. Or you need to get that delusion checked out. Nigel Dobson-Keefe, thank you.
Thank you again tonight. Thank you for Peter. It was a great night.
And it's good night from me, Steve Davis. Next week we have Samala Harris joining us. I believe we're recording in her granny flat, she said.
Okay.
That's coming up next week. Good night, Don. And actually, Nigel's been lamenting that our innuendo quotient has been dropping.
Yeah.
So we want to get it up tonight.
Okay.
Can we do...
That was good. That was actually very subtle.